Are there further comments on the bill or amendment? Senator Baldwin.
I will offer and withdraw an amendment. But before I do, I just wanted to comment on one provision in the manager's package. I am glad that we have taken a step in this manager's package to prevent OMB from implementing a needless policy at NIH to forward fund significantly more of its grants. NIH has not provided any kind of justification for this change other than some vague references to providing certainty for scientists. At the same time, it is terminating thousands of grants for scientists in the middle of their research. We've been hearing from leading cancer organizations, among many others, about just how devastating this plan for multi-year funding would be for their medical research, for patients that count on this research. The scheme would cut the number of grants the agency funds by thousands. NIH itself estimates that this plan would award 4,000 fewer new grants this year than next, a 40% reduction. And what OMB tried to do earlier this week, which was referenced earlier when it tried to withhold billions more in NIH funding through a footnote in a budget document, that should be an eye-opener to all of us. So I'm glad we included this change in the manager's package, and I will keep fighting to ensure that the funding we appropriate for life-saving biomedical research is spent on life-saving biomedical research. Now, Chair Collins, I have an amendment to provide funding for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting in fiscal year 2026. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, I'm deeply disappointed by the decision of a slim partisan majority 2 weeks ago to eliminate funding for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. I'm offering this amendment today, but will withdraw it and not ask for a vote because I believe that there is a path forward to fix this before there are devastating consequences for public radio and television stations across the country. The specific funding that was rescinded 2 weeks ago was included in the Labor, Health and Human Services, and Education Appropriations bill that passed this committee with overwhelming majorities in the last 2 years. And let me be clear, no one raised a concern about it at the time. No one came to talk to me about it when I chaired the subcommittee. No one mentioned it when we marked up those bills. And then suddenly, this became such an urgent problem that had to be addressed immediately because the president said so. This cut to local public radio will fall hardest on those in rural areas. And stations like WOJB and the Northwoods of Wisconsin, that the Corporation for Public Broadcasting supports the infrastructure and systems that support local radio and stations. Without it, these stations will close. And it will be those in rural areas they're most likely to lose access to public radio and television. That will mean that when there are natural disasters and the only signal being broadcast to impacted areas is over public broadcasting, individuals in those areas will not get those alerts. It will mean that children will have less access to quality educational programming like Daniel Tiger and Sesame Street, and they'll have less access to that, and they'll spend more time on YouTube looking at CoComelon and others. I know that there are majorities in both the House and the Senate that want to fund the CPB. So it's hard to believe that we've ended up in the situation that we're in. And I'm going to continue to work with my colleagues to fix it. So I will withdraw this amendment and not ask for a vote. But before I do, I will yield back to the chair for any other members who would wish to speak on this topic.
Senator Capito.
Thank you. And I'd like to thank Senator Baldwin for offering the amendment and withdrawing it, and understand your concerns. But we all know we litigated this 2 weeks ago, I believe it was, and for quite some hours on the Senate floor, and the Senate voted to rescind these funds. Adopting this amendment would have been contrary to what we have already voted on. I do want to note that the FEMA warning systems will not be impacted, because that was an issue that was brought forward, which means our rural communities will still receive those public emergency alerts and warnings. Thank you.
Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And I appreciate that we're able to have hopefully a briefer conversation than we had the night of the rescissions, but again, an opportunity to weigh in on the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the value that comes to our small rural community-based stations, whether they be radio or public TV. I think people know my position on it. I have recounted the value in my state of public broadcasting. I did vote to move the Labor HHS bill out of the committee today, even though I have deep concerns about where we are right now with funding for public broadcasting. I do want to acknowledge the efforts that Senator Rounds made the night of the vote-a-rama there on the rescissions, and the commitment that you have received to get some support for our tribal radio stations. I think that can be helpful, even if it is just a one-year increment. I still have a lot of questions about the proposal, including where the funds are coming from, how much we're talking about, whether this is a one-time deal or a multi-year deal, the eligibility criteria. We're continuing to work to identify that. We're working with the administration. We're working with the Alaska Public Media folks to ensure that our stations can receive this. But I come from a state where we have half the tribes in the United States of America, and of our 26 public radio stations, less than half of them are considered to be tribally owned or serving tribal lands. So these are some things that we're working through, and I share that with you because I want you to know that this senator is not going to stand down when it comes to providing support for these resources for educational funding, for cultural funding, but also on the emergency side. As you all know, there was really a historic earthquake just off the Russian coast night before last. I was up super late getting the tsunami warning alerts. Those are great, those are super important, but I got a note from KCAW, which is in Sitka, Alaska, down in southeastern. All up and down the Alaskan coast, there were tsunami concerns, obviously, after an 8.8 earthquake. Sitka was placed under tsunami watch. I'm reading her email here, later downgraded to an advisory before being canceled. KCAW, the public radio station there, was the first and only to report on this in Sitka. They did not receive any notification from NOAA via the EAS, the Emergency Alert System. Our reporters discovered the warning because they talked to public radio down in the Aleutians who did get the warning, did get the alert. They reach out. This is, call it old-fashioned. But when you're in really remote places and scary things are coming your way, you want to figure out every means that you possibly have to communicate there. So KCAW was the only alert system that was active in this community for the duration of the watch and the advisory. And they've shared with me, they're like, Lisa, without federal funding here, our ability to provide for this is very significantly impacted. After the rescissions vote, and again, it was a very clear determination with the votes that we had on that. But I did a reach out. It wasn't me. I had my high school interns contact every public radio station in the state, and we found out that some of our stations are going to be forced to close this year. Some can weather the storm for maybe a year or so. They've got some reserves, but some pretty drastic changes to staffing and program. Some are in the process of figuring out how to move forward. The challenge is they don't have the ability to fundraise in their communities. These are small local communities. The budgets of almost half of the radio stations in Alaska depend 50% or more on CPB funding. 20 of the 26 stations depend at least 30% on the funds. And again, these are the smallest, most rural and economically disadvantaged communities in the state. So I'm not giving up. I appreciate, Senator Baldwin, your effort to work with any of those of us moving forward. I'm going to be spending time during this August break going around to my communities and going into my public radio stations, going into my public TV stations, and just saying, how you guys doing? Because I know what I'm going to be getting, and I want to bring the feedback to those of you. So I thank the committee, again, for the effort to resolve things here in a civilized way that's going to allow for a good bill to move forward, but know that this is one of those issues that I'm going to continue to work together with my colleagues, and I appreciate the indulgence of the chair for this amount of time.
Senator Coons.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to briefly thank Chair Capito, Ranking Member Baldwin, for a very strong bill. Like many others here, I want us to keep working on addressing the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. I've heard from a broadcaster in Delaware that may well go under if we do not address this in the future. But two other wonderful things in this bill I wanted to just thank you for. Level funding for AmeriCorps, $1.25 billion, and language that urges the distribution of the grants. This is a long-standing bipartisan program that does great service across our nation and deserves support. And the Act for ALS work that Senator Murkowski and I worked so hard on. One of my closest friends has just developed a very difficult case of ALS. And to know that we are investing $100 million as a nation in ALS research, in addition to all the other critical NIH research, I think is a vital piece of this bill that will bring hope to families all across our nation. Thank you for your work on this bill.